Eliza Vance inherited more than just her grandmother's secluded house. She inherited its secrets, its solitude, and a silence that pressed in on her chronic insomnia. An audio archivist by trade, she sought refuge in the quiet decay, hoping to mend frayed nerves alongside aging artifacts. But among the dust-laden heirlooms lay a peculiar music box. Its melody, unearthed and restored, promised the elusive peace of sleep, a promise it kept with terrifying efficiency. For the lullaby didn't just bring rest, it was an invitation, broadcast into the deep quiet, summoning something ancient, patient, and utterly indifferent to the waking world. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The gravel crunching under the tires of her aging sedan was the loudest sound Eliza Vance had heard in hours. It signaled her arrival at the end of a long drive and the beginning of something undefined, unsettling. Hemlock House, her late grandmother Elara's home, stood partially veiled by the encroaching Maine woods, a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't derelict, not quite, but it wore its age and isolation like a shroud. Clapboard siding, faded to the color of old bone, clung stubbornly to the frame, and the dark windows watched her approach with a vacant indifference. Eliza cut the engine, and the silence that rushed in was profound, almost physical. It was the kind of quiet that hummed just below the threshold of hearing, punctuated only by the sighing wind in the pines and the distant, mournful cry of a loon from some unseen lake. She stepped out of the car, the damp, earthy smell of the woods filling her lungs. Grief was a heavy cloak, but beneath it, heavier still, lay the bone-deep exhaustion of chronic insomnia. Weeks, months, stretching into what felt like years, marked by the relentless ticking of the clock beside her bed, the frustrating churn of thoughts that refused to cease, the gray, fuzzy edges of days lived on sheer willpower. She hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the forced change of scenery, the task of sorting through a life packed away in boxes and drawers, might somehow reset the broken rhythm of her sleep. The key, cold and ornate, turned stiffly in the lock. The heavy oak door groaned open, releasing a breath of trapped air, cool, dry, and smelling faintly of dried lavender, old paper, and something else, something vaguely metallic and dusty. Inside, the house was a time capsule. Shadows clung to the corners, thick and permanent. Furniture huddled under white sheets like patient ghosts. Books lined shelves from floor to ceiling in the living room, their spines faded gold lettering hinting at forgotten knowledge. Everywhere, Elara's presence lingered, in the precise arrangement of porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece, the worn patch on the armchair, the faint scent clinging to the air. Eliza had barely known her grandmother. Elara had been a figure of stern eccentricity during infrequent childhood visits, her letters sparse and formal. Now, surrounded by the intimate detritus of her life, Eliza felt an odd mix of connection and profound distance. The first few days were a blur of dust motes dancing in stray sunbeams, the rustle of aging paper, and the hollow echo of her own footsteps on the wide plank floors. Sorting through Elara's belongings felt like an archaeological dig into a private history. Eliza, an audio archivist accustomed to the meticulous preservation of sound, approached the task with professional detachment, boxing up clothes, cataloging books, trying to impose order on the quiet chaos. But the house itself seemed to resist easy categorization. Its silence wasn't empty, it felt watchful, expectant. And her insomnia, predictably, remained her steadfast companion, mocking her hopes of finding rest in this isolated place. Nights were the worst, the profound quiet outside amplifying the noisy restlessness within her own head. It was on the fourth sleepless night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a gnawing sense of frustration, that she found it. Tucked away in the bottom drawer of a heavy mahogany secretary desk, beneath bundles of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon, was a music box. It wasn't large, but it was striking. Crafted from a dark, almost black wood she didn't recognize, with a grain that seemed to ripple like water under moonlight, it was intricately carved with swirling, abstract patterns that avoided easy interpretation, not flowers or figures, but something more fundamental, like representations of sound waves or shifting earth. There was no keyhole, it seemed designed to be wound from the bottom. It was coated in a thick layer of dust, dulling its strange beauty. Her archivist's instincts, combined with a desperate need for distraction, kicked in. Carrying it carefully to the kitchen table, where the light was better, Eliza began the delicate process of cleaning it. She used soft brushes and microfiber cloths, her movements precise and methodical. The wood felt cool and smooth beneath the grime. As the dust came away, the carvings seemed to deepen, drawing the eye into their complex loops and whirls. She found the winding mechanism on the underside, a simple, sturdy brass key fixed to the base. It was stiff, resistant. She worked a tiny amount of lubricating oil into the joints, her fingers probing the mechanism gently. After several minutes of careful coaxing, something clicked internally. Holding her breath, Eliza gave the key a tentative turn. It resisted, then yielded with a soft snick. She wound it slowly, feeling the tension build in the hidden spring. A faint, expectant tick-tick-tick emanated from within. Setting it carefully on the table, she nudged the small brass stop lever. The first notes chimed out into the oppressive silence of the house, startlingly clear and resonant. It wasn't a familiar tune, no childhood lullaby or a classical piece she recognized. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, yet profoundly strange. It moved with a melancholic, looping grace, employing intervals and harmonic shifts that felt alien, sidestepping the comfortable resolutions of standard Western scales. It evoked a sense of immense antiquity, of deep, sorrowful time. Each note seemed to hang in the air, displacing the silence, vibrating not just in her ears but seemingly in the wood of the table, the floorboards, the very bones of the house. It was complex, intricate, yet possessed a powerful, almost hypnotic simplicity. Exhaustion washed over her anew, heavier than before, but this time mingled with a strange fascination. The melody continued its intricate cycle, seeming to weave itself into the fabric of the quiet room. She listened until the spring wound down, the final notes fading into a silence that now felt somehow altered, deeper. Eliza carefully closed the lid, the carvings cool beneath her fingertips. Without conscious thought, driven by a weariness that went beyond mere lack of sleep, she carried the music box upstairs and placed it on her nightstand beside the relentlessly ticking clock. Perhaps, she thought dimly, its strange beauty was simply a welcome distraction. She didn't yet understand that the lullaby wasn't just filling the silence, it was speaking to it. 3:17 a.m. The glowing red numerals on the bedside clock mocked Eliza. Outside, the Maine woods were sunk in impenetrable darkness, the only sound the faint, rhythmic sigh of wind through the pines, a sound that usually soothed but now merely underscored the frantic noise inside her own skull. Thoughts chased each other in an endless, unproductive loop, the daunting task of the house, half-remembered fragments of conversations with her grandmother, the persistent, grinding weight of grief, and overriding it all, the raw, frayed desperation for sleep. She'd tried everything tonight, warm milk, reading a dry academic text, meditation apps that felt utterly useless against the entrenched wakefulness. Her body felt like lead, her eyes burned, but her mind remained stubbornly, cruelly alert. Her gaze fell on the music box beside the clock. Dark, silent, enigmatic. The memory of its strange, haunting melody surfaced, the clarity of the notes, the way it had seemed to momentarily push back the oppressive weight of the house's silence. On impulse, born purely of desperation and a weary desire for anything different, Eliza reached out. Her fingers found the winding key on the bottom. The mechanism turned with smooth resistance now, the click soft but distinct in the stillness. Setting it back down, she hesitated for only a second before sliding the small brass lever. The lullaby began, notes spilling into the darkness like drops of cool water. Clear, resonant, otherworldly. It filled the room, the complex, melancholic progression seeming to physically displace the air. Eliza lay back against the pillows, closing her eyes, expecting to listen, to be perhaps momentarily distracted from the internal static. Instead, something else happened. Almost immediately, a profound and unusual drowsiness washed over her. It wasn't the gentle drift she occasionally experienced before her insomnia fully kicked in, this was a heavy, irresistible tide pulling her under. Her limbs felt weighted, her thoughts slowed abruptly, losing their frantic energy, smoothing out like ripples on a still pond. The intricate melody seemed to bypass her ears and sink directly into her bones, a vibration that resonated deep within her chest. The last conscious thought she had was a flicker of surprise at the sheer speed and intensity of the sensation. Then, nothing. She didn't dream. There were no flickering images, no narrative fragments, no emotional echoes. It was absolute oblivion, a depth of sleep she hadn't experienced since childhood, perhaps never. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging her consciousness into a void so complete it felt bottomless, timeless. Sunlight, streaming thick and dusty through the bedroom window, woke her. Eliza blinked, momentarily disoriented. The room was bright, the clock reading 9:42 a.m. She had slept for over 6 hours straight. The grogginess of profound sleep was there, but underneath it pulsed an energy, a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She sat up, stretching, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of rested muscles. It was glorious. But as the initial euphoria faded, Subtle oddities registered. The air in the room felt unusually cold, colder than the hallway outside the closed door. A distinct chill lingered, despite the bright morning sun. And on the polished surface of the nightstand, a fine, almost silvery layer of dust coated the music box, stopping precisely at its edges, while the rest of the tabletop remained clean from her dusting the day before. It was peculiar, specific. She brushed the dust away with a finger. It felt unnaturally fine, almost like pollen or ash. As she did, she caught it, a faint, almost imperceptible low-frequency hum in the air, a vibration felt more than heard, like the thrum of distant, heavy machinery. It faded almost as soon as she focused on it, leaving behind only the normal morning sounds filtering in from outside, birdsong, the rustle of leaves. She dismissed it. Lack of sleep played tricks on the senses, she reminded herself, and maybe the deep sleep had left her slightly disoriented. The cold could be a draft from the old window frame. The dust. Maybe static electricity? Rational explanations lined up, comforting in their logic. The overwhelming relief of having slept, truly slept, overshadowed the minor strangeness. That night, there was no hesitation. As soon as the familiar restlessness began to stir, Eliza reached for the music box. She wound it, the clicks precise in the quiet room. She slid the lever. The haunting melody began its cycle, and the heavy, irresistible drowsiness descended almost instantly. Again, the plunge into dreamless, absolute blackness. She woke the next morning feeling equally refreshed, the fatigue that had been her constant companion dissolving like mist. But the disorientation was there again, that fleeting sense of lost time, of having been somewhere else entirely. The room was cold again, that same localized chill clinging to the air around the nightstand. The fine, silvery dust rested solely on the music box. And this time, when she woke, the low, fading hum seemed infinitesimally louder, lasting a second longer before vanishing. A flicker of unease went through her, a tiny dissonant note beneath the relief. The melody was beautiful, the sleep it brought was a miracle, but there was an undeniable strangeness to the experience, a subtle wrongness she couldn't quite articulate. Yet, the alternative, the grinding exhaustion, the frayed nerves, the endless nights staring into the dark, was unbearable. Night after night, the ritual repeated. Wind the box. Release the melody. Plunge into oblivion. Wake refreshed, but with the lingering cold, the specific dust, the fading hum, and the growing sense of unaccounted for hours. Eliza Vance, the rational archivist, began to rely on the unexplainable artifact. She was trading sleepless nights for something else, something deep and quiet and profoundly unnatural. The lullaby had become her key to silence, but she hadn't yet begun to question what door it was unlocking, or what might be listening on the other side. The profound sleep granted by the music box began to bleed into Eliza's waking hours, not as drowsiness, but as subtle corruptions of the familiar world. It started with sound, or rather, the absence of it. During the day, as she sorted through boxes in the dusty spare room or attempted to catalog LR's extensive library, moments of profound, unnatural silence would fall over the house. It wasn't just quiet, it was a dead quiet, as if the ambient noise of the world, the creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind outside, the hum of the ancient refrigerator in the kitchen, had been abruptly absorbed, sucked into a vacuum. These moments lasted only seconds, but they left Eliza feeling unnerved, her ears straining against the sudden void, a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Then came the distortions. The rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall would suddenly sound muffled, as if submerged in water, before resuming its normal cadence. The low drone of the refrigerator would momentarily warp, sliding down in pitch before correcting itself. Once, while boiling water for tea, the cheerful whistle of the kettle seemed to stutter, emitting a choked, discordant sound before returning to its usual shrill cry. These were fleeting anomalies, easy to dismiss individually as quirks of an old house or an overactive imagination fueled by recent deep sleep cycles. But their frequency increased, weaving a pattern of subtle auditory wrongness into the fabric of her days. More unsettling were the phantom notes. Sometimes, in the dead quiet of the afternoon, when the music box lay closed and silent on her nightstand upstairs, Eliza would hear faint, ghost-like fragments of its melody. A few bars, clear as a bell, would seem to drift from the corner of the room or echo down the hallway, only to vanish when she tried to focus on them. It was like an auditory afterimage, the strange, melancholic tune imprinted not just on her memory, but somehow on the space itself. She needed a lifeline to the outside world, a dose of normalcy. She called Liam Foster, her closest friend back in the city, the digital connection a fragile bridge across the miles of isolating woods. "Eliza. "You sound better?" Liam's voice, slightly tinny through her phone's speaker, was warm with concern. "Getting any sleep out there in the wilds of Maine?" "You have no idea," Eliza replied, relief flooding her at the sound of his familiar pragmatism. "I found this old music box, Liam. Belonged to my grandmother. It plays this weird, really beautiful lullaby, and it knocks me out cold. Deepest sleep I've had in years." "A music box? Seriously? Like, wind-up tin soldiers kind of thing?" He sounded amused, skeptical. "No, it's different," Eliza tried to explain, struggling to put the experience into words that didn't sound completely unhinged. "It's antique, wood, really intricate. And the sleep is total. Like, blackout oblivion. Woke up this morning feeling like a new person." "Hey, whatever works," Liam said, clearly happy for her relief, even if the method sounded odd. "Just don't get addicted to creepy antique lullabies." "What's it sound like?" Eliza hummed a few bars, the strange intervals feeling clumsy and inadequate coming from her own voice. "It's hard to describe. Kind of sad, but peaceful. Really resonant." "Weird," Liam commented. "Never heard anything like that." "Well, I'm glad you're finally getting some rest. This whole sorting the creepy old house thing sounds draining." As they talked, Eliza noticed it, a faint, low hum underpinning Liam's voice on the call. It wasn't static, not the usual electronic fuzz of a bad connection. It was a low, resonant frequency, almost identical to the fleeting hum she'd heard upon waking. "Liam, do you hear that? That humming sound?" "Humming? No, line sounds clear on my end," he said, sounding slightly puzzled. "Maybe it's your phone? Or something in the house?" "No, it's—" "Never mind," Eliza said quickly, realizing how strange it must sound. "Probably just the refrigerator." But the hum persisted for a few more seconds, a subtle vibration against her ear, before fading away completely. Liam heard nothing. The sound, whatever it was localized to her end, perhaps only to her perception. The conversation continued, touching on city gossip and work updates, but a new layer of anxiety had settled over Eliza. The strangeness wasn't confined to the night anymore. Driven by a growing unease and a need for answers, Eliza redoubled her efforts in sorting through her grandmother's papers. Alara had been meticulous, keeping records of household expenses alongside pressed flowers and cryptic notes on local history. In the bottom drawer of the secretary desk, the same one where the music box had been hidden, Eliza found something else, a small, leather-bound journal secured with a tiny brass lock. It felt heavy in her hand, the leather worn smooth with age and handling. There was no key in sight. Her archivist's curiosity warred with a prickling sense of trespassing, but the odd occurrences, the silences, the distortions, the phantom notes, the hum on the phone line, tilted the balance. The music box had come from this desk, possibly from Alara herself. Perhaps this journal held some explanation, some context for the strange melody and its potent, unsettling effects. Finding the key became her new obsession. She searched Alara's jewelry box, sifted through sewing kits filled with tarnished thimbles and tangled threads, checked inside dusty teacups and ornate silver boxes. The house was full of hiding places, potential repositories for a small, easily concealed key. Each empty drawer, each box yielding nothing but mundane contents, added to her frustration and a growing sense of urgency. The lullaby gave her sleep, but the quiet it left behind was becoming increasingly populated by echoes and distortions. She needed to understand what she had awakened, not just within herself, but potentially within the silent, watchful walls of Hemlock House. The locked journal felt less like a diary and more like a crucial piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was assembling, its secrets guarded by a tiny brass mechanism, waiting to be unlocked. The subtle auditory anomalies were becoming the least of Eliza's concerns. The presence connected to the music box, the silent entity drawn by its haunting melody, was beginning to exert a more physical influence on the environment. It started small, almost negligible things that could, initially, be rationalized away. Objects placed near the music box when it played would vibrate slightly, not just from the sound waves, but with an independent, resonant tremor. A glass of water on the nightstand would develop faint, concentric ripples on its surface, even when the music was at its softest. The cold spots intensified. The distinct chill she'd noticed upon waking now became pockets of intense, unnatural cold that lingered long after the music stopped. Sometimes, entering the bedroom hours later, she would walk through a patch of air so frigid it raised goosebumps on her arms, a stark contrast to the ambient temperature of the room. It felt less like a draft and more like a zone where heat had been deliberately absorbed or displaced. Then came the pressure. It was the most disquieting phenomenon yet. Usually occurring when the lullaby reached certain complex, looping passages, Eliza would feel the air around her thicken, becoming heavy and resistant, like moving through deep water. The pressure would build in her ears, a palpable weight pressing down on her chest, making it momentarily difficult to draw a full breath. It felt as if the very atmosphere was compressing around her, charged with a vast, unseen energy. And with the pressure came the undeniable sensation of being watched. It wasn't the feeling of eyes observing her, there was nothing localized or directional about it. Instead, it was a sense of vast, silent, and utterly impassive awareness. It felt ancient, immense, and profoundly indifferent. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but its sheer scale and alien nature were terrifying. It was the sensation of a minnow realizing it swims in the same water as a whale. The whale might not even notice the minnow, but its sheer presence changes everything. This vast awareness seemed intrinsically linked to the music box, its focus intensifying whenever the lullaby played, drawn across unimaginable distances or dimensions by the specific sonic signature. Eliza finally found the key. It wasn't hidden in an ornate box or tucked within a secret compartment. It was hanging on a small, tarnished brass hook inside the grandfather clock casing in the hallway, hidden behind the heavy pendulum. Her fingers trembled slightly as she retrieved it, the cold metal feeling significant in her palm. Returning to the lock journal, she inserted the key. The tiny lock clicked open with surprising ease. She settled into the worn armchair in the living room, the afternoon light slanting through the dusty windows, and opened the journal. The first entries were mundane, dated decades ago, notes on gardening, observations about the weather, brief mentions of visitors. Alara's handwriting was neat, controlled. But as Eliza turned the pages, skipping forward through the years, the entries became sparser, the handwriting tighter, more angular. Then, she found it. A section where the dates became less frequent, sometimes just seasons or lunar cycles noted. The entries grew fragmented, infused with an anxiety that contrasted sharply with the earlier calm. "The deep sleep is a mercy," one entry read. "But the quiet it leaves behind. It listens." Another, dated simply "Harvest Moon," "Played the tune tonight. The air grows heavy. Must be careful. It doesn't like sudden silence." Further on, the humming. "Louder now when I wake. Or perhaps I am simply learning to hear it. It resonates in the bone." Alara wrote about the music box itself, confirming Eliza's suspicions. "It is very old. Older than this house, older than the town. Handed down. Mother called it the stillness listeners call. Specific instructions were always given." Eliza scanned the page eagerly. "Play only when the need is absolute. Never play it outside these walls. Silence is its voice, be wary of inviting it in too deeply." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Eliza's fascination. Her grandmother hadn't just owned a peculiar artifact, she had known about its power, its danger. She had seemingly used it herself, perhaps as a desperate measure against her own demons, or maybe even for containment, a way to appease or manage the entity the lullaby summoned. Why hadn't she warned anyone? Why leave it where it could be found, used again? Was the isolation, the eccentricity, a result of this knowledge, this burden? A growing obsession mingled with the fear. Eliza needed to know more about the melody itself. She recorded it on her phone, the simple device struggling to capture the resonant depth, the strange harmonics. She uploaded the recording to music identification apps, scoured online databases of folk tunes and obscure classical compositions. Nothing. She emailed audio clips to music historians, ethnomusicologists specializing in archaic scales and forgotten traditions. The responses, when they came, were polite dismissals. No one recognized the melody. It didn't conform to known structures, defied easy categorization. It was unique, sui generis, possibly predating written notation entirely, a relic from a time with different rules for sound and silence. The failed research only deepened the mystery and Eliza's sense of isolation. The lullaby wasn't just a song, it was a key, a sonic invocation with no known origin or parallel. And the entity it summoned, the stillness listener, wasn't some local ghost or folkloric boogeyman. It felt older, vaster, something elemental drawn out of the deep quiet by a melody crafted specifically for its ears. Her grandmother had known, had wrestled with it, had left behind only fragmented warnings in a locked journal. Now, Eliza was using the key, night after night, inviting the immense, silent awareness into the house, into her sleep, and increasingly, into the fabric of her waking reality. The pressure in the air felt heavier just thinking about it, the silence outside the windows deeper, more watchful. The boundaries of Eliza's reality were beginning to fray, warped by the nightly plunge into the music box's profound sleep and the lingering influence of the entity it summoned. Time itself became elastic, unreliable. The 6 or 7 hours of oblivion granted by the lullaby often felt subjectively instantaneous. One moment the melody would begin, the next sunlight streamed through the window. Yet, conversely, the moments immediately following waking were often distorted in the opposite direction. Getting out of bed, making coffee, the simple routines of morning could feel drawn out, sluggish, each second stretching into an eternity. It felt like swimming through unseen currents, time accelerating and decelerating without warning. This temporal distortion wasn't just subjective. On several occasions, Eliza glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall shortly after the music box had started playing upstairs, only to see its long pendulum frozen mid-swing. Minutes later, it would be ticking again as normal, having somehow jumped forward to the correct time. Once, waking abruptly in the pre-dawn darkness, she swore she saw the digital display on her bedside clock flicker backward for a split second before settling. These weren't mere mechanical failures, they felt like localized ripples in the flow of time itself, emanating from the music box's operation. More insidious was the thinning barrier between sleep and wakefulness, a phenomenon the journal cryptically referred to as the bleed. The deep, dreamless sleep was no longer a clean break. While awake, particularly in the quiet hours of the afternoon or the deep stillness just before dusk, Eliza began experiencing brief, vivid hypnagogic hallucinations intrinsically tied to the lullaby. Swirling, abstract patterns, reminiscent of the carvings on the music box, would momentarily bloom behind her eyes. The physical sensation of sinking, that heavy pull she felt just before sleep overtook her, would sometimes wash over her while she was sitting reading, making her grip the arms of the chair. Phantom notes from the lullaby, clearer and more persistent now, would weave through the ambient sounds of the house. The comforting oblivion of the deep sleep started to feel less like rest and more like lost time, chunks of her existence simply excised, handed over to the silent, watchful presence drawn by the music. What happened during those hours? Was she merely unconscious, or was her awareness somehow interacting with the vast, indifferent entity? The thought sent a chill colder than any draft through her. The sleep was no longer just a cure for insomnia, it felt like a transaction, and she was increasingly terrified of the price. She turned back to Eliza's journal, searching for answers, for guidance, finding only confirmation of her growing dread. The later entries chronicled her grandmother's escalating fear and desperation. "The hum is stronger," Eliza wrote, her script becoming almost illegible, jagged with haste or tremor. "It lingers long after the melody fades. The silence feels heavy now. Pregnant. It waits." There were descriptions of precautions taken, experiments conducted in fear. Tried placing quartz near the box. Seemed to irritate it? The pressure increased. Silver seems inert. Iron filings? Perhaps they disrupt the resonance. Must try. There were sketches of symbols Eliza didn't recognize, complex, looping sigils that echoed the box's carvings. Had Eliza tried to ward the room, or perhaps the entity itself? Most disturbingly, the journal revealed Eliza's struggle to stop using the music box, mirroring Eliza's own dawning realization of dependency. Tried to endure the waking nights, one entry confessed. But the silence. It calls. A psychic pull, a demanding emptiness that screams for the melody. And the sleeplessness returns tenfold, filled with whispers just below hearing. Easier to play the tune, to accept the deep sleep, than to face the waiting quiet. Eliza hadn't just feared the entity, she had become reliant on the very thing that summoned it. She was trapped in a cycle of needing the sleep the lullaby provided while dreading the presence it attracted. The journal described withdrawal symptoms Eliza was starting to recognize in herself after even brief consideration of skipping a night, a spike in anxiety, a return of vicious insomnia, and crucially, that feeling of the silent, watching presence pressing in, becoming almost physically palpable in its demand for the familiar, invoking sound. Eliza closed the journal, her hands shaking. She wasn't just uncovering her grandmother's secrets, she was reliving them. The music box wasn't a cure, it was a trap, beautifully crafted, melodically insidious. The deep sleep was the bait, and the ancient, indifferent entity drawn from the primordial quiet was the consequence. Time warped around her, reality frayed at the edges, and the comforting darkness of the lullaby now felt like the threshold of an abyss. She felt the house watching her, the silence listening, waiting for the familiar notes to begin again. And deep within her, despite the mounting terror, a part of her craved the oblivion, the temporary cessation of fear and thought that only the lullaby could provide. The addiction Eliza had described was taking root. The lullaby itself seemed to be changing, or perhaps Eliza was simply becoming more attuned to its deeper frequencies, its hidden intentions. The hauntingly beautiful melody remained, but certain phrases began to repeat with a subtle, insistent emphasis. The rhythm felt more pronounced, more hypnotic, transitioning from melancholic grace to something almost coercive. Listening now required a conscious effort not to be completely drawn in, to maintain a sliver of analytical distance against the powerful current pulling her towards passive acceptance. The feeling of compulsion intensified. Even during the day, the memory of the melody would surface, bringing with it a potent urge to go upstairs, wind the box, and let the sound wash over her. It was more than just a desire for sleep, it felt like a specific craving, an addiction targeting the deepest parts of her psyche. Fear warred constantly with this manufactured need. Simultaneously, she began to discern something new within the clear, chiming notes, faint, layered complexities that hadn't been apparent before. At the peaks of certain phrases, hidden beneath the primary melody, she could almost hear impossibly faint clicks, soft static like whispers, or resonant undertones that felt like echoes from a vast, empty space. It wasn't musical, it sounded like the sonic artifacts of the entity itself, the hum LR had written about, trying to bleed through, to communicate or manifest more clearly via the conduit of the music. Liam called again, his voice tight with urgency, shedding his earlier skepticism. "Eliza, I've been digging. That area where your grandmother's house is. It's got history. Weird history." "What kind of history?" Eliza asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "Obscure stuff, local legends mostly dismissed as folklore," Liam explained, his words tumbling out quickly. "But it keeps coming up. Stories about the deep woods there, about places where sound goes to die. An old tale about something they called the stillness listener or the silent one. Not a ghost, something older. They said it sleeps in the deep quiet but can be called or lured by certain sounds, certain patterns. It doesn't speak, but it absorbs. People getting lost, found later catatonic, or just vanishing entirely near specific quiet zones in the hills. They said it lulls them away." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Stillness listener. The exact name from LR's journal. Liam. "I know it sounds crazy, Eliza, but it matches too closely with what you've been describing. The deep sleep, the weird quiet. And I found mentions of your grandmother's family name, Vance, connected to some of these older accounts. Not accusatory, more like custodians. People who knew about the quiet places. Eliza, you have to stop playing that music box. Whatever it is, it's not just a sleep aid. It's a beacon. You need to leave that house. Now." Liam's frantic warning struck home, amplifying her own terror. He was right. She knew he was right. That evening, she resolved not to play the music box. She would face the insomnia, face the silence, face whatever withdrawal came. It was hell. The moment darkness fell, the familiar tendrils of sleeplessness wrapped around her, but this time they were imbued with a terrifying malevolence. The quiet of the house wasn't just empty, it felt charged, demanding. Auditory hallucinations plagued her, not just phantom notes of the lullaby, but the clicks and whispers she'd begun to discern within the music, now amplified, seeming to skitter just at the edge of her hearing. The feeling of the silent, watching presence intensified exponentially, pressing in from all sides, a crushing psychic weight demanding the familiar sound, the invoking melody. Intense anxiety clawed at her, making her heart pound, her breath catch. It felt like the entity was outside the door, outside the window, pressing against the very walls of the house, drawn close by the previous night's invitations and angered by the sudden silence. By 2 a.m., she was a wreck, pacing the bedroom floor, trembling, drenched in cold sweat. The compulsion to play the music box was overwhelming, a physical ache, a screaming need in the core of her being. The fear of the entity was immense, but the fear of enduring this state, this targeted psychic assault born of silence, was rapidly becoming greater. She looked at the music box on the nightstand, its dark wood seeming to pulse faintly in the gloom. She understood LR's fragmented confessions now. The trap wasn't just the lure of sleep, it was the agony of withdrawal. The lullaby didn't just summon the entity, it conditioned the listener, making them dependent, making silence unbearable. She was trapped. Playing the music invited the slow erosion of reality, the potential absorption into the silent, waiting darkness. Not playing it meant facing this immediate, terrifying pressure, this psychic siege. The music box, once a source of desperate relief, now represented an impossible choice, addiction and dread intertwined in its haunting, ancient melody. The breaking point came just before dawn. Eliza couldn't endure the crushing pressure, The phantom whispers, the raw terror clawing at the edges of her sanity any longer. Whether it was the unbearable withdrawal forcing her hand or a desperate, last-ditch decision to confront the thing she had awakened, the result was the same. With trembling fingers, almost numb with cold despite the lack of a draft, she reached for the music box. Winding the key felt like turning a dial that opened a floodgate. The familiar clicks echoed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. She placed it on the nightstand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and slid the lever. The lullaby began, but this time, it was different. The sound itself was the same haunting melody, yet the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The entity, the stillness listener, responded instantly, its presence surging into the room not as a gradual pressure, but as a tidal wave of silent immensity. Reality buckled. The very air thickened to the consistency of water, heavy and vibrating with an inaudible frequency that resonated deep in Eliza's bones, making her teeth ache. An intense, consuming cold dropped the temperature dramatically, frost blooming in intricate, impossible patterns on the window panes. The walls of the bedroom seemed to ripple, losing their solid definition, stretching and contracting slightly as if the geometry of the space itself was becoming unstable. Gravity felt wrong, heavy one moment, disconcertingly light the next. Sound, all sound except the relentless, clear notes of the lullaby, was utterly absorbed. The frantic pounding of her own heart, the rasp of her breath, all vanished, swallowed by a profound, oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. There was nothing to see. The entity remained non-corporeal, but its presence was absolute, filling every cubic inch of the room, pressing against her skin, her mind. It felt like being at the bottom of an infinitely deep ocean of quiet. The vast, indifferent awareness she had sensed before was now focused, immense, and terrifyingly close. It wasn't malicious, but its sheer otherness, its ancient, silent nature, felt utterly inimical to human consciousness. It was pulling at her, not physically, but psychically, urging her to let go, to dissolve into the timeless, soundless state it embodied. The lullaby was the anchor, the pathway, and it was threatening to pull her permanently into the silent, waiting darkness it summoned. Panic warred with the hypnotic pull of the music. Eliza forced herself to think, her mind sluggish against the pressure. Alara's journal. The fragmented clues. Silence is its voice. Doesn't like sudden silence? Iron filings? Perhaps they disrupt the resonance. Iron. Resonance. Disruption. Her eyes scanned the room frantically. Her gaze landed on the heavy, old-fashioned radiator near the window, cast iron. Then, on the nightstand, beside the music box, lay the small brass key she had used to open the journal. Brass wouldn't work. But the grandfather clock downstairs. Its pendulum bob, the weights. Heavy iron. It was a long shot, based on fragmented ramblings and desperate hope. She needed to create a counter-resonance, something to jar the specific frequencies of the lullaby, something loud and sudden made of the right material, as Alara had speculated. The lullaby seemed to function within a very specific sonic and energetic field. Disrupting that field might break the connection. Moving felt like wading through setting concrete. The entity's presence resisted her movement, the air thick with its silent insistence. The lullaby continued its inexorable, hypnotic cycle, each note trying to pull her back down into passivity. Gritting her teeth, Eliza lunged towards the bedroom door, wrenched it open. The pressure lessened slightly in the hallway, but the unnatural silence persisted. She stumbled down the stairs, the grandfather clock looming in the dim light. With fumbling, numb fingers, she opened the clock's tall case. The heavy iron pendulum bob hung motionless, time was still frozen here. She unhooked it. It was heavy, colder than seemed possible. Carrying it back upstairs felt like carrying a block of frozen darkness. The bedroom was worse now, the walls shimmering more violently, the cold biting deep. The music box played on, its melody the only anchor in the dissolving reality. The pulling sensation was stronger, a siren call to oblivion. Eliza raised the heavy iron pendulum bob high, summoning every ounce of remaining willpower against the lullaby's command to be still, be quiet. With a choked cry, she slammed the iron bob down hard onto the operating music box. The impact was deafening in the unnatural silence. A screech of protesting metal, splintering wood. The lullaby stuttered, warped into a horrific, discordant shriek for a split second, then abruptly cut off. The backlash was instantaneous and violent. As the melody shattered, the immense presence recoiled, but not before lashing out. Eliza felt a blinding psychic jolt, like an electric shock to her brain. Intense vertigo sent the rippling room spinning. A flood of silent, alien sensations washed through her, incomprehensible thoughts, feelings of immense age, crushing pressure, the vast emptiness of interstellar space, all crammed into a microsecond of agonizing overload. She cried out, staggering back, clutching her head as the pressure violently receded, leaving behind a ringing silence that was suddenly, blessedly, just silence. The oppressive, weighted silence shattered, not gradually, but instantly. It was replaced by the sudden, almost violent return of normal ambient sound. The wind sighing outside the window, the creak of the old house settling, the frantic thumping of Eliza's own heart against her ribs, sounds she hadn't consciously registered before now slammed into her awareness, jarringly loud, almost painful in their normalcy. The profound, unnatural quiet, the voice of the stillness listener, was gone. The air in the room felt thin and sharp again. The intense cold dissipated rapidly, leaving behind just the ordinary chill of a pre-dawn morning in an old house. The walls solidified, the strange ripples vanishing as if they had never been. Gravity felt stable beneath her feet. Eliza stood trembling in the center of the room, gasping for breath, sweat cooling rapidly on her skin. On the nightstand lay the wreckage. The beautiful, dark wood music box was splintered, its intricate carvings marred. The heavy iron pendulum bob lay beside it, dented but intact. The delicate internal mechanism was visibly crushed, twisted metal silencing the lullaby permanently. The source was broken. The invitation had been rescinded. She was left profoundly shaken, hollowed out by the psychic backlash and the sheer terror of the preceding hours. A high-pitched ringing lingered in her ears, tinnitus, sharp and insistent, a phantom echo of the entity's silent scream or the shattering of the melody. Trauma settled deep in her bones, a cold certainty that she had brushed against something vast, ancient, and utterly inimical to human life, something that existed in the gaps between sounds, in the deep quiet spaces of the world. Staying in Hemlock House was impossible. Every shadow seemed too deep, every moment of quiet felt pregnant with a potential return of that oppressive presence. The house itself felt tainted, imprinted with the memory of the entity's attention. Within days, she had packed her essential belongings, boxed up the shattered music box, wrapping it tightly in cloth and placing it inside an old iron biscuit tin she found in the pantry, just in case Ilara's instincts about iron were correct, and contacted a realtor to handle the sale of the property and its remaining contents from afar. She didn't care about the money, she just needed to be away, surrounded by the noise and bustle of the world she had briefly, terrifyingly, lost touch with. She called Liam, her voice still unsteady, and told him everything, the journal, the escalating phenomena, the folklore, the terrifying climax, the psychic backlash. He listened patiently, the concern clear in his voice, though she could sense the undercurrent of disbelief, the struggle to reconcile her harrowing account with the rational world he inhabited. He believed she believed it, believed she had experienced something profoundly traumatic, but the reality of an ancient, sound-attracted entity and a reality-warping music box was perhaps a bridge too far. She didn't blame him. The story felt insane even to her, the survivor. She made him promise to keep her notes, her recording of the lullaby, now deleted from her phone, but the file sent to him, just in case. A warning, a record, however fragmented. Months passed. Eliza moved into a small apartment in the city, deliberately choosing a unit overlooking a busy street. She worked, saw friends, tried to rebuild a semblance of normalcy. But the experience had left indelible scars. She developed a distinct aversion to silence, always needing some form of background noise, music playing softly, the television murmuring, a fan whirring. Complete quiet felt dangerous now, vulnerable. Her tinnitus remained, a constant, high-pitched reminder. She became hyper-aware of sounds, startling easily at sudden noises, finding herself analyzing ambient sounds for hidden frequencies, for the telltale pressure in the air that might signal something returning. Her insomnia was better, ironically, perhaps because the fear of what sleep could bring was now greater than the fear of wakefulness itself. She rarely thought consciously about the music box or the stillness listener, pushing the memories down. But some melodies, once heard, embed themselves deeper than conscious thought. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eliza was walking down a crowded city sidewalk, the noise a comforting buffer, traffic, chatter, distant sirens. A car idled at the curb, its radio playing some forgettable pop song. As she passed, a specific sequence of 5 notes from the song's bridge, a minor key arpeggio completely unrelated in context, style, or origin, snagged her attention. By sheer, random chance, those 5 notes momentarily, perfectly, echoed the core melodic phrase of the haunted lullaby. Eliza froze mid-step. An instantaneous wave of irrational, gut-wrenching terror washed over her. For a fleeting second, the noisy street sounds seemed to recede, replaced by that phantom feeling of immense, silent pressure, The chilling awareness of being listened to by something vast and unseen. Her breath hitched, her blood running cold. Then, just as quickly, the car pulled away, the snippet of music dissolving into the urban cacophony. The pressure vanished. The terror subsided, leaving her trembling slightly, heart pounding. It was just a coincidence. A random sequence of notes. Wasn't it? She stood there for a long moment as people flowed around her, the city's noise a shield once more. But the certainty was gone. Some melodies, once heard, can never be truly forgotten. And some silences, once breached, might always be listening. Enjoyed this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.